Welcome to The Drummer's Pathway, the podcast about music, life, and the creative process. Hello, I'm Michael Scott, and welcome to the Drummer's Pathway podcast, where I talk with drummers, educators, and artists about the creative and professional journeys that shaped their lives. This episode features my conversation with drummer Curt Bisquera. Also known as Kirkee B, Curt is a Grammy-nominated session and touring drummer who's been laying down grooves for some of the biggest names in music for over 3 decades. Born in Santa Maria, California, Curt started drumming almost as soon as he could walk, and later studied at the Percussion Institute of Technology, where he crossed paths with legendary session drummer Jeff Porcaro, a connection that helped launch his career. He's gone on to work with artists like Mick Jagger, Elton John, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Céline Dion, Johnny Cash, Sarah McLachlan, Seal, Bonnie Raitt, and more. In this episode, we discuss the importance of embracing simplicity and letting the song take center stage, look back at his time studying at the Percussion Institute of Technology, explore how his connection with Jeff Porcaro led to unexpected opportunities, and dig into the challenges of navigating social media while building a professional career. And now, let's get started with my conversation with Curt Bisquera. Not only have you established yourself as a first call session player for many different artists, but you have done it with a sense of positivity, integrity, and by maintaining who you are as a creative artist. And in a world where everything is so cookie cutter based on perfection, to be able to establish a career when you are able to take something that you are passionate about and use it to enhance other people's visions is something that I find to be incredibly admirable and inspirational. And one of the things that I'm really looking forward to is just getting your perspectives about the shifts in the industry over the last few decades, because when you first started out, it was very much an industry based on musicians in a room, songwriting, development, and building projects. And now in this generation, it's very much about isolation and cookie cutter perfection. So we're going to get into some of those things. But before we jump into that, you actually have been working as a professional drummer since around the age of 11. So early on, what were some of your initial inspirations and what sort of started this whole bug for you?
First and foremost, the inspiration was my mom, because my mom was a musician. And her brother, my uncle, he was a musician as well. And they played on all the local nightclubs in the area that I grew up in Central California in Santa Maria. So they were my first inspirations in terms of music and learning how to play different styles. And, you know, I came up at 11. Well, I started playing when I was 2, but professionally at 11. But just, you know, being at 11 years old and playing with adults, you know, that I had to really learn a lot of styles quickly, efficiently, and legitimately, you know, through learning through my elders and taking the time to pay attention and listen and emulate and practice a lot. You know?
Now, if you look back, what are some of the early takeaway lessons that you learned from those experiences that really helped shape your career?
Listening, you know, as an 11-year-old, you know, preteen, even teens, you know, we're not good listeners, right?
Yeah.
We're in our own world and doing our own thing, and we know everything because we're teenagers. But, you know, coming up, you know, playing with older musicians, and it forced me to listen and to pay attention. Because if you didn't, you know, you would fall behind or you would, you know, it just wouldn't be a good look or a good feel, you know, on the bandstand. So, you know, it was really kind of being shoved into a situation where you had to be a professional at a very early age, and I'm glad that happened. I'm glad that was forced upon me that way, because I was able to bring it into my adult professional life as a musician and excel that way, through paying attention and listening and having zero ego about what I have to add or take away to the situation.
Well, I read a quote that you had stated when people asked about your influences, that your influences were musicians that were better than you so that you can improve as a player. And I really like that perspective, because that shows that you're open to other perspectives, other experiences. And sometimes when people have a list of influences, it's one or two people, and your development at that point starts to become emulation as opposed to exploration. And I think when you're just open to people who are challenging you, who are better than you, that's a motivator. And I think that's something that also, in addition to developing your craft, also helps you to develop the interpersonal connections that are required to establish a career.
Exactly. Again, my mom being my mentor and my uncle, both of them being my mentors musically coming up, it just helped me later down the road when it really mattered, because it was like, okay, now I'm actually choosing this as an occupation, as my job, as my dream, as my my desire. And again, playing with older musicians, playing with musicians that are better than me, I always want to be in that situation, because I always want to grow. I don't want to become complacent. I don't want to become, the old fart, playing the old fart beats and the old fart. I'm just not, it's not of my genetic or my mentality of being an old fart. I always want it to be fresh and exciting, and I always want to learn something new and be around young players that are inspiring. I want to be around the older guys and gals that are completely just have made their mark in music and continue to. There's a lot of people I feel that are missing the mark with a lot of older musicians, because they're the ones that set the trend. Mm-hmm. And now we have all these young musicians that are coming up, and don't get me wrong, they're amazing. They're immensely gifted, but I think forgetting about what paved that way, what laid that foundation in the first place, that rarely gets looked at these days, I feel. So when I do see a young musician that's coming up, mention their elders and their influences from the past that are older than them, that have been there and done it. It's like, okay, now there's the tip of the hat. And it's important to always look backward so you could look forward, for sure.
Well, another thing that I have heard you mention is that one of the things that really inspired you early on was liner notes on records.
Absolutely.
And then rather than sort of gravitating to wanting to be the person in the band and have that be the basis of your career, you wanted to be the name on the record that just could work with all of these different players. And a lot of them from our generation were faceless. They were names that people knew, but there wasn't the same perspectives and exposure to these unless we took the time to seek out these players, because they weren't the stars. They were the ones behind the stars. And for me, I've always taken the perspective that I'd rather be part of the vision than be the central figure in the vision. So the whole perspective of being the session guy for me and just being part of the picture was something that really appealed to me. And I think that's something that really fueled your passion.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd read all these names on these records, coming up, and I'd always wonder who Jeff Porcaro was, or J.R. Robinson, or Craig Cramp, or Paul Lime, or Harvey Mason. Who are these guys? Yeah. Why do I keep reading their name? Why are they always on these records? Why did they play on multiple songs on this record? What is a studio musician? What is these names? What are these names that keep showing up? And it wasn't just the drummers. It was Dean Parks on guitar, Steve Lukather, Mike Landau, Mike Miller. You know, it was all these names, these guitar players, these keyboard players, saxophone players, bass players, Leland Sklar, Freddie Washington. You know, the list go on and on and on and on with all the instruments. But it always fascinated me that these musicians were called in to not only play on the same record, but different styles of music, different labels, different artists, different, you know, artists that's that sung in different languages. You know, that just fascinated me. Like, why did they get the call? Why are they the ones that provide the drumming for these songs? And it just fascinated me. And I finally learned what a studio musician was, and it was just like, okay, that's what I totally want to do. Because, you know, growing up, I knew all the styles, you know, playing Latin and jazz and bebop and salsa, and, you know, just all the styles. And I thought, God, I would love to be able to make money doing that and playing with different artists. And so, you know, the thing that just really, you know, raised the hair on the back of my neck was a studio musician, because they definitely were the ones that made that happen. You know, they could walk into any situation, have a chart thrown in front of them, and execute the music.
I remember once picking up a copy of Billy Cobham's Spectrum album and reading the liner notes and being blown away that the bass player on it was Leland Sklar, who I was used to hearing as like a singer-songwriter drummer, you know, with like James Taylor and all these other icons, and being the bass player for Phil Collins, of who I'm a huge fan of, and then just being completely blown away that it's in a completely different context, but yet his work on that record is just brilliant. And I think that when you look at some of the session icons, some of the things that you may be exposed to may appear to be simplistic because they're designed to enhance the music as opposed to feature themselves. But over the years, I've learned that often the people that have the most discipline for really playing the parts are the people that are most technically accomplished. They just understand the whole idea of context.
Exactly. You know, it's like, you know, reading a manual. You know, if you follow the manual to the T, you'll get to what you need to do for that particular thing that you're working with. But if you're kind of just winging it and reading a couple of paragraphs here and there, and okay, I get it, you know, and start twisting some knobs and stuff. Well, you know, some magic could happen to that, yes, but tragedy could happen as well. And I think, you know, the studio musician, they're able to read the room, understand the vision that the artist is trying to convey, and make their story come to life and bring it to fruition. And that's what makes a studio musician great, because, you know, they know how to help define your story.
I have often said that sometimes when I look at some of the sessions that I've done, if I notice myself, then there's something about the performance that I wish I could change. If I notice the song and don't notice myself, then I know that I did the job to the level that I was setting out to achieve, because sometimes there's nothing more distracting than the one crash cymbal hit that you did out of habit rather than necessity. And that's the one thing that you always tend to gravitate towards, that you wish you could fix.
Right.
It's really about outlining the vision and making that your purpose, as opposed to just falling into the expected pieces. And that's something that's just learned through practice and experience, and being open to the feedback and the other perspectives.
Exactly. You know, to your point, less is more, especially when you're going in the studio and you're recording someone else's music. If it's your stuff, do whatever you want. But if it's someone else's song and their music, their vision, you know, the less is more approach is always, you know, the Boolean base, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then you could build from there. But, you know, 9 times out of 10, just keeping it simple, keeping it, you know, as musical as possible without getting in the way, That's the magic of making a record, you know?
Well, another thing that I have learned when you look back at some of your early influences, there's always music that we got into really early on that still really fuels our passion. And if we get a chance to play along or that sort of thing, I've often realized that it's often simpler than you think it is, because over the years, you start to envision parts and things that people have done that they actually didn't do on the original recording. You know, I'm a huge Stuart Copeland fan, and
Right.
and I love a lot of his little stylistic characteristics, and I find that really inspiring. And then so if I'm playing along with a Police record, I add all these little things. But when I actually stop playing and listen to the record, you start to realize that he's doing about half as much as you actually think that he's doing, because it's all about the song. And so over time, our own development starts to add the pieces that we think should be there. And then you need to take a step back and go, hey, wait a second. It didn't need to be there in the first place. And I think it's something that you do exceptionally well.
Well, you know, I call that thinking like a drummer. You know, we always want to put a crash cymbal where it's not supposed to be, or a fill, or something that we would do on our record, you know. But by not doing it, you're now taking yourself out of the drummer role, and now you're bringing yourself into a participant as a band member, as a rhythm section player, and you're adding to the collective. Because sometimes, most of the time, crash cymbals just get in the way, because they're in that same frequency of where the guitar is either playing a melody or some rhythm, or, you know, some counterpoint stuff. So less is more. And if you do the take as minimal as possible, again, there's your Boolean bass. You could always add. You could always punch in a crash cymbal or a fill. If it's already there and it's too much and you have to take away, then it's like you're subtracting rather than adding to. And I'd rather be on the side of add something rather than start stripping stuff away.
We already talked about the fact that you started a professional career really early on, but you were self-taught throughout those years. You learned sort of through the experiences and through people that would sort of guide you and mentor you. But you didn't really start a formal education until after high school, where you registered to go to the Percussion Institute of Technology in Los Angeles.
Yeah, Musicians Institute. Yeah.
What inspired that choice, and what were you seeking from that experience?
Oh, I can answer that in two sections. The first section being that I saw an ad for Musicians Institute, and it said, learn with the pros. And it was a picture of Joe Porcaro and Ralph Humphrey. I was done. I was like, okay, that's where I'm going to go. Secondly, I knew I had to move out of my small little town and go to PIT, learn from Joe and Ralph, because I wanted to be a studio guy, and I wanted to learn how to read. And that's where I learned how to read drum notation, was there studying with Joe and Ralph and all the other great teachers that were there at the time, because I was determined to know what a quarter note was, or eighth notes, or dotted eighth notes, or sixteenths. I was already playing it. I had been playing it since, you know, being an 11-year-old. Yeah. But I wanted to know what I was playing. I wanted to be able to write what I was playing. I wanted to be able to read what I'm playing. And I knew, being a studio guy, you had to be a decent reader. And so I really worked on that a lot, you know. And luckily at that time at MI, there were some great teachers, and there was a plethora of teachers there that were just always willing to take the extra time to pull you aside and help you out with your reading. And luckily I had that at my disposal when I was there. And they really got my reading together. And it wasn't until I started, you know, like 5 years after the fact of graduating there, that I actually started needing to utilize what I've learned there at Musicians Institute.
Now, with both Ralph Humphrey and Joe Porcaro, were there any particular lessons or advice that they gave you through that development period that really stuck with you?
Wow. I think with both of those guys, I think they already knew that I had the goods to do what I was set out to do. So they were really adamant about, staying sharp on reading and technique and understanding, playing with a click and understanding, conceptually what's happening musically, when you're called to play on a gig or a session or whatever, to be aware of what it is you're about to play. And, they were sticklers about that. They were studio guys. They did movies, they did film, they did TV, they did, live gigs that required them to read 5, 6, 8, 12 pages of music on the music stand flawlessly. In order to do that, you got to keep up on it. I mean, God bless him, Joe P., who ended up being a dear friend of my wife and I, him and his lovely wife, Aileen. He was always practicing. He was always practicing reading. He was always practicing sticking. He was always writing a book. He was always writing curriculum. And even after he retired, it's like, Joe, what are you going to do with this stuff? He goes, I'm going to put out another book. I'm going to do. But he always was in that mode of learning. He never let that go. And I just had such admiration for that, And the guy was, well retired and enjoying the good life. But man, you throw a piece of paper in front of him and he just became this other person and was able to just read it down like nothing.
There's an art form to being able to read music. There's also an art form to be able to interpret music, because someone can give you a paint by number painting and you can paint the colors that they tell you, and you can, regardless of how much effort you put into them, you can get a result that looks pretty good.
Yep.
But if you put the time in to really learn how to take the tools that are given to you and apply them and put them in different situations and different scenarios and add different styles of music over top of these, you start to learn the importance of interpretation. Because reading music can be a very mechanical thing if you don't understand the context of where you're supposed to be applying it for. And we both know that sometimes the level of charts that are given to you are written from people that are not the musician. They're written from someone that has a technical approach to writing these notes down, but we have to be able to take that, interpret it, to play it the way they really intended, because they didn't notate it properly.
Yeah, and a lot of the time the chart is just kind of a guideline anyway, and because you're getting the call to be you. Yeah. It's like, oh, we want you to be Curt Bisquera and play the way you would play on the song for us, for me, and use the chart as a guideline. Use it as, capture the main figures of the tune, but have at it the rest of the way, and there again lies the less is more thing, because it's like when you hear someone go, oh, have at it. Oh, okay. I'll solo on your song. Not that I would never do that, but there are those that would take that opportunity and go, okay, I'll add what I think would be necessary, and then it becomes a drum solo. Again, it's helping the artist fulfill their vision.
I often find that sometimes the most profound lessons have nothing to do with the technical aspect of learning the instrument. It often comes down to the mindset, which is important because throughout this whole development, there are a lot of things that we need to navigate. And at times we can get frustrated, or we can get down on ourselves, or deal with the whole aspect of imposter syndrome, or want to give up. And we just need someone to guide, mentor us, and sort of help us, because everyone's journey is different. And I think sometimes in certain situations, people will teach you the keys to success, but that was their keys to success. And that may have worked 2 generations before. And as the industry changes, we need to change, but we also need to change in a way that works for what our intention is. So are there any pieces of advice in terms of mindset approaches that you learned from those experiences that really helped you navigate the start of your career?
Well, I think the mindset to, like you said earlier, you just have to be open to what it is that you're trying to convey, and what that person or persons They hired you because they want you, not because you were drummer number 37 down the list and they couldn't get 1 through 36. They called you because it's like, you know what? You're the right person for this. And here's why. We love your work on this particular record, or we love we saw you play at this gig and you're awesome. And we want that kind of thing on our music. So it's just being open to what it is that you're being handed on the platter for that day. It's like, okay, here, we're going to cut 7 songs today, and here's the vibe of each song. They're all pretty much Americana songs, but it requires a little bit of maybe some Motown and some R&B thrown in there every now and then. And so you take that information and you listen to the music, and then you start to formalize in your head what you think it should be, and then bring it to the kit. And everything that you think it should be, you cut in half. And then you cut that in half, and then you don't add any crash cymbals. And then you don't add any crash cymbals, and you don't add any fills.
Yeah.
So that now what you have done is, again, brought it down to the baseline, the roux, the carrots, the onion, and the celery. Salt and pepper, a little bit of garlic, and you stir it in a little olive oil, and just let it simmer, let it come to a nice, liquidy roux, and then you add your chicken stock and then your pieces of chicken, and away you go. So I think, just being able to be open and allow yourself to absorb what it is that they're laying down for you to pick up. You know what I mean? What they're putting down, you got to pick up, but only pick up what's necessary. Because, if we try to pick up the whole thing, we could throw our back out. It could be too much, and again, getting back to being on the side of adding things rather than taking away. I think that's where you're always going to win, is when you're in that place of, okay, I could add some crashes here. Okay, that's great. And then that way it's then it becomes a nice musical journey without being annoying.
When you allow space, it means you're listening and it's allowing other people to participate in the conversation, as opposed to just trying to talk over each other because you just want to get your point in. And I think that is something that is like a skill that we learn the more that we do this. For the most part, it's not something that everyone always learns, but that might not be their intention. But I think right. In the type of work that you're doing, I think that's something you've navigated that exceptionally well.
Oh, well, thank you. And again, it's just paying attention and adding what is necessary. It's so easy to get 4 people in the kitchen and they all have an idea of how they should make, biscuits in the oven, and you're going to get 4 different ways on how to do that. And the key is to find the way to get those 4 people to make one delicious batch of biscuits, and I think, that's where great studio musicians come into play, because they're able to take their role, step into their role, and add what's necessary to make the end result.
As a studio musician, one of the most iconic players out there was Jeff Porcaro, who not only was an inspiration to you, but was also a mentor to you and an early supporter of your professional career. And that, affiliation sort of came because you were studying with his father, Joe. And so how did you kind of make the connection with Jeff, and what were some of the things that he did early on to really help you get your foot in the industry?
Well, unbeknownst to me, and this is probably maybe a year and a half before Joe P died, he told me one day, we were hanging out, we went out for a coffee, and he said, Kirkee B, Jeff used to come to the school knowing that that you didn't know that he was there, but he would come specifically to check you out, to just see how you were progressing. because he had plans for you. And I was like, what are you saying? He goes, oh, man, he knew that you were going to be one of the cats coming up and that you would be next on the scene to do session work, because he liked the way I played. He liked my feel, and he knew that that was what I was really trying to go after. And he knew that I was a fan. And so he kept his eye on me during that whole year of attending MI. And then, a few years later, I get the phone call from Jeff, asking if I would be the drummer on the new Boz Scaggs record that he was producing. This was just months before him passing away. If you look at his discography, to this day, it's enough body of work that still drowns out 5 working drummers that are still alive today. Mm-hmm. The guy had played on records, God, when he was 16 years old. And in that short amount of time between 16 and 38, his passing, he played on so much music, and he had so much more to offer, and he I think, obviously gone too soon, but man, had he still been with us, if he was here right now, man, he definitely would have been the next, like, Quincy Jones or David Foster, or, any of those great producers that we know and love, that, were formerly musicians and then become, the amazing producer that they become. And Jeff was definitely on his way for that. But just always paying attention to him and always listening to what he played on, his advice that he would give me, it was always simple stuff, it was always like, hey, look, man, if you get called for a session, show up an hour early. He was a big thing on being early, and what's that saying? If you're on time, you're late.
Yeah.
So to this day, I'm always early to a session. My wife's always like, why are you leaving so early? It's like, I don't want to be late. And I like getting there early. So by the time it's downbeat, I'm relaxed. I know what I'm about to jump into, that. And Jeff was a big stickler about that, about being early. So I remember that always sticking in my mind.
Well, one of the things that I've also taken with regards to that perspective is that being early means you're in a better headspace, because you've allowed time to accommodate and adapt to the obstacles that may show up through there. Also, it changes the dynamic of the studio, because when you're early, you're ready to go, and when everyone else is coming in, the studio can be a bit of a pressure cooker at times. And if you're ready to go and you're comfortable and you're positive, it changes the dynamic. If everyone's showing up last minute and everything's running behind, then you're starting the project with tensions and hesitations, and that's going to reflect the final product. So I think taking that perspective is essential.
Well, yeah, and it's already tension going to the studio. Just LA traffic alone can cause, just too much tension and headache, and I've been to so many sessions where people have been late because of the traffic getting in. It's stressful, and to perform under stress like that, that's not my bag. I like to come in relaxed and feel comfortable. Drums are tuned, my coffee, my bagel, my water, all set. All the accoutrement is taken care of.
When I look at your discography, which is extensive, you have worked with a lot of icons in this industry, and I want to touch upon a couple of those situations. But when you first started out, when you look back, are there any particular sessions early on that really stand out to you as things that you're particularly proud of and that you really learned a lot from?
I'm changing again the answer to that. I get asked that a lot, and I'm going to say all of them, from the demos all the way up to Grammy Award winning, double platinum records that I played on. All of them are as important as the next, because I'm always learning something from all of those sessions. And there may not be the next Elton John right now, or Tom Petty, or there's the whole artist thing, the whole recording artist thing is completely different now. But man, I mean, during those times when I was doing all that session work, when there were labels, when there were budgets, when there were, all the things that made a record happen, every scenario was important because it either included some of the great engineers, that I've worked with through the years, the Al Schmitz, Jack Joseph Puig, producers, Rick Rubin, Phil Ramone, the list goes on and on. So every session is important because at one of those sessions, someone of importance was there that helped make my recording better, whether it was, the engineer or the second engineer or the producer or the musicians that were involved. So I have to say that every session just had a thing about it, and that had an importance factor of 10, because without those people making it happen, the record wouldn't have happened. And back then, it was tape. It was 2-inch tape. So the musicians, the band would go for takes. They would go from top to bottom. Not now where it's like, okay, let me punch only the verses, and then let me only punch the B sections, and let me just punch the choruses, And that's easy to do with a computer. And I think it's really boring, quite frankly. I do it. I have to do it because that's the way a lot of people work now. But I came up on tape. I came up playing the song top to bottom, 4.5 minutes of boom, bat, grooving with the click, making a song, lifting it, rushing the fill just ever so slightly to bring the excitement to the first chorus, right? Now it's quantizing everything, and nothing has excitement, nothing has hair on it anymore.
When you were starting out, one of the things that made a lot of that stuff so iconic is that recording was about performance and vibe. As you said, it was about, going through, playing the few takes, picking the one that felt the best, and then going through and building upon that. Whereas the nature of technology now has gotten away from, much smaller budgets to no budgets. And so now everything is created in bedrooms and home studios where everyone is emailing their parts and things, which is fine. And, technology will change. But the other problem is that it changes your performance. Because as you said, it used to be about going for the right take. And then even if you're fixing something, your take by playing it again is going to have a slightly different vibe than the previous one. So every performance is going to have its own character.
Right.
And its own vibe. Whereas now it's all about, we got to get this one part right. And people don't think about the performance anymore. They think about the part, and then they think about the next part because they know everything is going to be pieced together. And some exceptional music can be made that way. But I think there's a lot of soul and disconnect that gets taken away from that I think is sad, because we lose that pride of being able to play the song, because now we know that we can just piece things together.
Right. Yeah. And there's no fun in that.
No.
The fun is in the mistakes. The fun is in the discovery. And when there's no discovery in creativity, then like you said earlier, it's, painting by the numbers. It's not creating. It's already done. Just make sure you have your 4 colors on your pen and just fill it in, and I think and I feel and I hear a lot of music like that these days.
And the other thing too is that there's so much stuff now that is sound replaced, and using different loops and things, which is fine because that's part of the nature of how music is made these days. But it takes away the character of the music that we used to love, because the musicians that we loved all had a sound and all had a vibe to them. And that was something that came across through these recordings.
Right.
The recording on early Rolling Stones records might not have been the cleanest, but the vibe of the stuff that Charlie Watts is playing, you can't recreate, because there was just something about the sonics in that room. It's the same thing when you look at really old Motown records or early jazz albums. There's something about the sound within the room and the inconsistencies between the bleeding of this in here. It creates a vibe, and that's one of the things that makes things exciting, because I think sometimes people forget that the hook in certain songs is often the sonics. It's not always about the perfection of the parts pieced together, because sometimes that acoustic snare drum sound that has that really quirky vibe to it ends up being the character that makes that song stand out on the radio.
Exactly. 100%.
For someone that also does a lot of work recording now in somewhat isolation because of the nature of the things that we do, how do you stay motivated when you now have to sort of be the producer, the engineer, and the drummer for a lot of these things, when you're not getting the same immediate feedback that you used to get when there was a band in a studio together?
Well, I like to think and feel like when it's left upon me to provide the drum track, I'm going to approach it in a way that is, again, helps fulfill the artist's vision. But what I've been doing lately, and I've been finding it really kind of a successful pathway, is that, the artist will ask for me to play a very specific part, to the chart and this, that, and the other, to the song, which I'll provide. But what I like to do is tell the artist, let me do it. No click. I'll play to you. I'll play how I feel it should be. And let's see what happens. And if you like it, great. If not, then you have, the safety take of me playing with the click and what's the written thing. So like 9 times out of 10, they go for the track where I'm not using the click, because they're like, wow, the choruses are more exciting. The bridge is more exciting. It's like, they're like, how did you do that? It's like, it's called being a human. Yeah. and they're like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, listen to the drums, how I speed up when that first chorus comes in, because I'm getting excited. Something's about to happen. And that's conveyed into the music, right? And so when you add a vocal to that, when that vocalist feels that urgent rush underneath him or her, they will react accordingly. So it just makes the music more exciting. It has a little more humanity to it, And again, you could always quantize it. You could always do whatever you want to it, sound replace it, whatever. But I'm finding more and more artists are wanting to take the take that I'm being me, because they're getting something that AI can't do, that their programmer can't do. It's like you could program a tempo change, but it's not the same. Yeah. It isn't, because immediately when you rush a fill and you come back down into the chorus, the tempo dips. It's just nature. It's just human. And so when you have that human element like that, just the little time fluctuation, it makes everything. It just makes it better, in my opinion. I mean, someone's going to listen to this and go, nope, it's got to be quantized 100%, sound replaced, But and I get it. I get it. I've done it all, and I understand it all, and I no longer take it personally, because I know it's the vision that needs to be met.
But that's also something that's hard at times to adapt when you are so intent on giving a good performance that's a reflection of you and your creative voice, and you hand that off to someone else and they cut it up and they move all these different pieces, and then they might get someone else to come in and overdub a tom part, and then they might take a sample off this one, loop it together to create this track, which is now essentially a Frankenstein version of what your original vibe intention was. And it could be cool, but as this process has changed, that's one of the things that we had to learn how to adapt to, was sort of letting go of that and being open to the fact that it's now out of our hands. And I've heard you say that when that whole change in the industry started to happen, that was something you had a hard time with early on, but you learned how to sort of adapt to the fact that that's just the reality of these situations. What was that perspective like when you started to notice that shift?
First of all, again, coming from tape, it was about doing takes. And then, fast forward into the world of Pro Tools and computers and recording that way. I was still going at it as if it was still tape. It's like, oh, no, let me do one more. And the day I realized I'm killing myself is when I begged the producer and the engineer to let me do another take. And when they said, okay, great, go ahead. Here it comes. And they start rolling the computer, the tape. And I saw them both get up and go to the kitchen and go get a coffee. And I thought, I am fucking busting my ass. What? I am fucking busting my ass for a take that's not even going to exist. Mm-hmm. They already got it 3 or 4 ago. They're going to chop it up. They're going to sound replace. They're going to quantize. They're going to repocket it. They're going to re-quantize again, repocket it, add so-and-so's snare drum to my sound, and then they're going to put so-and-so's tom fill. And then I was just like, oh my God, I'm free. So now I give 2 or 3 takes. Ciao. It was fun, everybody, because I was killing myself. But now that I know that I'm just providing information to the best of my ability, and maybe they'll keep some of that human information and quantize the rest, sound replace the rest, whatever. It actually freed me from the prison of having to get the good take. As a matter of fact, please robot me to Kingdom Come, please. Because you know what? I know that when I hear it, it's not going to sound like me. I know what I sound like. I know what I feel like. And you're going to extract all that feel and all that goodness, all the essence that I've accumulated all these decades. And you're going to squeeze it all out to a pulp and make it your own to fit your music. God bless you. Go for it. I applaud that. But the records I always look forward to are the ones where it's like I could be me and they want the feel, they want the mistakes, they want the humanity. Those are my favorite records because they're getting the genuine article. There's no quantizing, there's no sound replacement. It's like, okay, there it is. There's what he did,
Well, in preparation for this, when I went back and looked at your discography, there was 3 particular things that stood out to me that I kind of wanted to just ask you about. One of them was you played on Mick Jagger's 3rd solo record, Wandering Spirit. And I didn't realize that until more recently that you were the drummer on that record, because it's a record I hadn't paid attention to since it came out. But when it came out, it was such an inspirational record for the musicians I was working with at the time that I think there was 3 or 4 songs off that record that immediately went into our live show. And so I spent a lot of time going through and learning this. So I went back and I revisited it. And that whole album is vibe. It's just raw energy, vibe. And for me, it's infectious. And so how did that opportunity come about? And when you look back, how was that an important record to you at that time?
Well, it's an important record in the sense that, first of all, I got to record with the world's greatest frontman.
Yeah.
Mick Jagger. So that was like right there, a feather in the cap, and I could have retired right there and then said, okay, I climbed the mountain top and it was beautiful. But working with Mick, being able to work with Rick Rubin for the first time, that gig came about. He was auditioning drummers in New York and LA, and I got the call to audition. And I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again because it's so worth it. I knew that Mick was a James Brown fan, that he loved James Brown. And who doesn't love James Brown?
Yeah.
When people ask me my 2 influences, it's Led Zeppelin, James Brown. and anywhere in between. But those two bookends is anything and everything you need to know about rock and roll, funk, Grease, driving eighth notes, both on the funky end of things and on the rockin' part of things. And Bonham, I asked his son Jason, I was like, Jason, what did your dad listen to? And he goes, man, it was a house of Motown, because that's all he listened to. And that makes sense. When you listen to those Zeppelin records, man, they're funky. He's a funk drummer, and I get flack for some of my drummer friends. Are like, oh, he's a total rock guy. How could you say he's funk? I'm like, listen to that backbeat and where he puts it. It's so laid back, Anyway, getting back to working with Mick, just being able to work with him and Rick Rubin and getting the call and the audition, that was the thing. Getting back to that, there were some amazing drummers that were auditioning the day I was auditioning. I won't name any names, but there were some heavies there. And, they're going through the motions of playing Painted Black, Brown Sugar, all the hits, all the great songs. And, I could tell Mick was digging it, blah, blah, blah. But I knew that he was a James Brown fan. So it was my turn to audition. And he said, all right, Curt, what song would you like to play? And I was like, okay. I said, how about we jam onto some James Brown, Cold Sweat? And his eyes got this big. So he counted off Cold Sweat, and we played Cold Sweat for like 15, 20 minutes. He worked up a sweat. Everyone was working up a sweat. He was doing his chicken dance. And right after that, he just looked at me, and he's winded. I'm winded. He's looking at me. He's like, all right, you're hired. And I'm like, yeah. And I attribute James Brown, helping me get that gig. Because, sometimes you have to walk into a situation and rethink it. Think it out of the box. It was the obvious choice to play the hits with him. What else are you going to play? But then I thought, wait a second, of course there's something else to play. James Brown, he loves James Brown, so I think that was a contributing factor to me getting hired. I don't know. I'm going to have to ask him. If I ever see him again, I'm going to ask him, hey, did I get hired because we played James Brown, Cold Sweat? Yeah, that was really a wonderful, wonderful time. And, 1992, it was the same year working with Jeff Porcaro. So it was just kind of this whirlwind of wonderful musical things going on in my life, of working with Mick and Jeff. And, it was just, the 90s were amazing, because it was that last decade of when labels were still operating, budgets were still there, and artist development and those things.
One of the other projects that I was also revisiting the other day was you had a chance to record almost the entire She's the One record for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And that's another band that's about vibe and songwriting. I would assume it's not the typical session where you're coming in and everything's dictated. I think there's some flexibility for you to just become part of the band. And so what was your experience on that, and what did you sort of observe or learn from working with Tom Petty?
Man, working with him, and what I observed with him is that lyrics and melody are king. And that's first and foremost in a Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers record, is that the melody and the lyrics are the top priority. And the drummer's role, which I always felt, even with Stan Lynch, and Ferroni, the role in that band is just to keep excellent time, driving time, and to be, again, just a part of the whole. It isn't a drummer's gig per se. Drummer meaning like, flashy licks, a very specific sound. It's none of that. It's being able to fit your minimum musicality to support these amazing lyrics and melodies that are going on. And that was a huge lesson for me working with Tom, just knowing that timekeeping was the essential need for all those songs. And it wasn't just that record. I mean, it's like any record that Tom and the guys have recorded, you can tell that tempo and the drive, but it's a, I don't want to say it's a weird thing because it's not weird, but the way the drive of the drums happen without over excelling into the music, it just stays there like a Mack truck, you know. And it doesn't matter what song, what tempo, but there's this Mack truck kind of aspect of the drumming for that band that is bar none. And that was the thing I learned from Tom, you know, just watching him do his process of songwriting and figuring it out with Mike and you know, just you know, strumming out the chords and going, oh, okay, here it is. And then, all right, let's go in the room and go to the floor and start carving.
Over the years, I've had to learn a lot of that material. And I think one of the things that I really got out of it is, although from one perspective, it may appear to be simplistic, but it's very difficult to play because there's so much subtlety in it that you don't really notice because it doesn't get in the way of the song. But if it's not there, you notice it. You know, on the Wildflowers album with Steve Ferroni, there's so many subtle little hi-hat accents and things that he just does that if you don't put them in there, you're missing something. And then with Stan Lynch on you know, the records before that, there's something stylistically that's sort of pushing from his perspective, but at the same time still giving a laid back vibe. And it's difficult. And I think the more drummers spend time analyzing that music, the more you're going to learn about the importance of songwriting and really enhancing the vibe, because none of the stuff gets in the way. But all of it is essential because it's there to lift up the song. And I think your work on that record was exceptional.
Oh, man. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Now, I had said there was three things that I wanted to reference. The other one that I wanted to reference that I was revisiting the other day was you had the pleasure of doing a bit of recording with Elton John, but you actually got to play live, and you recorded a live album at Madison Square Garden where you got to double drum with the iconic Nigel Olsson. So what was that experience like? And before we get into that, I just want to say that when you listen to that record, that music is so iconic. And despite the fact that there are two drummers on that record, it's all vibe, and you don't notice that because it's you're both so in tuned in making that music so like spectacular that I think your work with Nigel on that was impeccable.
Oh man, thank you. Well, I mean, the only thing I could really say to that is that if you watch the DVD of that One Night Only, you constantly see me looking over at Nigel, because in my head I'm going, oh my God, I'm playing double drums with Nigel Olsson. Oh my God. That's all I mantraed in my head the whole night. You know, how could you not, you know, to be able to play double drums with one of your drumming heroes? That's, you know, we all dream of that. And that dream came true for me. But, you know, working with Elton, doing that record, doing those shows with him, it was a timeline of my life. You know, every song on that playlist of what we played, you know, it was a timeline of my life. You know, the first time I kissed a girl, the first time I learned Goodbye Yellow Brick Road on drums, the first time I heard Crocodile Rock, you know, there were all these things and it brought me back to, okay, that was in junior high. Mm-hmm. Okay, that was my sophomore year in high school. Oh, that was when... you know, I got a flat tire in my mom's car when we were driving it, you know, just all these flashback memories, you know, and Elton just has that kind of library of music that brings the fond memories of your life out, you know, and especially, you know, looking at the audience and they're all singing every song. The audience is singing every song, word for word. You know, that's a testimony to a great song. Both him and Bernie, you know, just the way they crafted music and songs and melody. It just, you know, that's a dynamic duo that I doubt we'll see in a while. Those guys just really knew and still know how to craft a song, you know?
Well, and one of the things that I've always really loved about Nigel Olsson's playing is that he's someone that understands the importance and the value of space in music. He allows the music to breathe so that when he comes in, much like an accomplished painter, to add his creative style over top of that, it just lifts you up, and it's just so incredibly exciting because it doesn't get in the way. And I think when musicians are, you know, learning their craft, you know, they're in such a hurry to add their creative say that it gets in the way of the whole vision in the first place. So it's also very difficult to play like that. And so kudos to you for not only playing this gig at such a high level, but also doing it in such a way that it nods to the respect and appreciation of Nigel's influence on your development as a player. And I think it's an exceptional record.
Oh, well, thank you. You know, again, you know, just listening to those records as a kid, you know, coming up and understanding where he was coming from drum wise, you know, and, you know, being raised by a piano player, I understood well how the drums and piano work simpatico. And, you know, I think that's why I was a good fit for Sarah McLachlan, you know, during my run with her. I just understand how to play behind a piano player, you know, my mom being 8 months pregnant with me and her playing in her jazz trio, you know, I think that had something to do with it. Just that understanding of how drums and keyboards work together. And, yeah. And to Nigel's credit, you know, he really understood Elton's approach and was able to stay out of the way, but still support, you know, and you know, to this day, when I hear Nigel play, I get chills.
Yeah.
He's just a great drummer.
We've talked a lot about the different aspects of your career and how the industry has shifted. Now, one of the other things that I was really curious about to get your perspective is that in addition to the changes that we've already talked about, one of the important elements of a career in the arts is connections and community. And early on, it's about, you know, taking, you know, the time to go through and build those relationships and make those phone calls and sit down with those people and support each other so that when someone needs a drummer, because you just had coffee with someone the week before, you're at the top of the list. Now with sort of the whole world and the industry now changing to really put an emphasis in terms of social media, I find the irony in social media is the word social, because it's really meant as a way to connect everyone. And I really view social media, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years, has become a disconnect. And so now what it is that you have people that put an emphasis on followers and marketing versus genuine relationships. And I'm really kind of curious in terms of your perspectives in terms of social media and how you look at how the industry really pushes that aspect of things, which unfortunately has really gotten away from building genuine connections.
Well, you know, I will admit I've never once got a gig through social media. You know, I've even advertised to give drum lessons through social media, and not a one. I look at it like do you remember a bulletin board?
Yes.
Like, you know, in college or wherever you'd see, you know, bulletin board and people put up, you know, free couch.
Yeah.
You know, do you need helpers to move your move all your furniture, mow your lawn, this and that. I find social media like that. It's like a big bulletin board, and we all get lost in the shuffle of thumbtacks, and we get thumbtacked over with something else because it goes by like that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course there are those that are standouts and that get, have 50,000 viewers, 100,000 viewers, 1 million viewers, whatever. But what is that audience? What are they attracting? What are they doing? And that's how I look at it. It's like, okay, what is their thing? It's like, oh, okay, they're getting all this traffic and they're helping sell drum heads or sticks or cymbals or whatever, or cosmetics, or so it's more like a big advertising hub, and whereas before it was about being social, like you're saying, hey, yeah, you're that guitar player that I met last Saturday at the club. Man, let's go meet for a coffee. Man, I'd love to just pick your brain, blah, blah, blah. And sure enough, from that coffee meeting, you would get the call for the guitar player. Hey, man, yeah, so check this out. I got this wedding coming up next month. Are you available? It pays $1,000. We only have to play for an hour and a half. Can you do it? Do you have a tux?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. So you go and make $1,500 from a coffee that you had with a guy a month prior, right? And then that snowballs into something else. Hey, man, by the way, the bride's dad really loved us. They want to hire us for this, corporate party. It pays $50,000. Do you know any bass players? And so there was always this intertwining connection of things that led to tours. Hey, by the way, so and so is putting a tour together. Do you want to go audition? Yeah, sure. So that's how things happened during the day, back in the day. Now with social media, it happens that quickly. It's just in an instant. I see things like looking for a drummer to go on tour, DM me for details. And I'm sure they just get flooded with, DM requests of, hey, I'm a drummer, I'm available. And so now you got to weed through all of this madness.
Yes.
You don't know who you're dealing with because you never had a conversation, and then you go to their socials and you see what kind of drummer they are. And I mean, I've been hearing nightmare stories about musicians that are well known on social media, but then you get them on the stage and they can't play. And that's so sad to me because now that's what it's come down to, that you're unable to back up what you put out there.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's this whole flash and this whole pan of these people that are playing amazingly just mind-boggling things in front of a camera. God knows how many takes it took. God knows how many hours it took to edit it all together. But when it's time to perform it live and to play in front of an audience and to execute, and they can't, that's a big, big disappointment and a big no-no. I mean, we're probably the same age, and, doing that is just unacceptable, right? And maybe that's me just being the old fart. That's the old fart in me, but I don't know, you got to be able to back up what you're putting out there, and I think we need to be more conscious of what we post out there. I try to be as conscious as possible to put out things that hopefully will inspire. I have some playing, it's like half and half. I have some playing that I put up, and then I post up stuff about my drums or whatever, just to show what I'm using. Maybe that's an influence, and mm-hmm. You can check it out at your music store. And so I don't know. It goes by so fast, and social media is so quick, and we're so quick to judge. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, they're playing that drum solo, okay, and you're just swiping. But what are we we retaining from the swipe?
Yes.
Right? What are we retaining? I'll tell you what I'm retaining. I'm looking at all those old videos people are posting up of Vinny, Gad, Weckl, Lenny White. I'm looking at all those videos, remembering, oh my God, yeah, that was an amazing time of drumming. Oh my God, Art Blakey, that's amazing. Elvin, wow, because it's like, oh, you want to see circus drumming and you want to see Chopville, USA? Scroll away, man. It's like, it's all there. You could see choppers chop all day long. God bless them. I don't have those chops. I wish I did. But man, I lean more toward those drummers that are actually doing something. There was a post that Gretsch Drums had put up, and Steve Jordan. He did a clinic recently, and all he did was play a groove. And I was like, there's the clinic. There's the clinic. On so many levels. First of all, he's playing a groove. No chops, no fills, no crashes. Just boom, bat, boom,
yeah,
bat. Just meat and potatoes, 2 and 4, 1 and 3. And and he says it, it could be boring playing that, but it requires a discipline. And I think, the discipline now has gone out the window, and it's all about, chops and burning. And again, no disrespect to that, because I wish I could do it.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's so lopsided. It's so chop heavy that we got to bring it back to where we get a nice balance of everything, so we can hopefully bring back music again, bring back the song. I miss songs. I really do miss a good song.
Well, and one of the things that I had sort of mentioned too is that, social media used to be about communication and connection and building these relationships. And now, to me, my perspective is that social media is about perfection and product. And the things that stand out most to me, are things that sometimes, you get people that have 1 million followers, but the things that stand out are people just showing a process. They say, I'm working on something. This is something I'm doing. It's raw. It's often unedited. And I find inspiration in that, because if everything is perfect, you're people say that they're to inspire people, but the reality is you're discouraging people, because they now think that they have to be at that level. And what people forget is that it's always a process. You're always going to learn. You're always going to push yourself. There's always going to be someone that's better at something than you are, but you shouldn't let that discourage you. You should let that inspire you to spend some time, looking at some new creative outlets. And I want to see the process and not the perfection, because then it allows me to feel encouraged to know that, hey, I can now go back into my studio and spend some time and feel good about the progress and not discouraged about the perfection. And also, I want to see people post videos of who they are and who they're trying to be as a creative artist, not strictly emulation. I have great admiration for, the covers and things that people are doing where they're emulating their heroes and they're trying to play these songs to perfection, which is amazing, because I can't always do that. But if I want to see it, I'm going to go back to the original artist, because that was their thing. So I'm not going to go and watch you do your cover, although I appreciate it and I get great, respect for that. But I'm going to go back to the original song in the first place, because that wasn't them trying to emulate. That was them creating the song, creating the music. And it was the song that captured me, not the drumming. And I became aware of the drumming because the song moved me so much. And I think you completely understand that perspective.
I absolutely do. And it was kind of like, growing up buying albums.
Yeah.
We bought albums based solely on the artwork, not knowing what the music was about. And that was part of the discovery, right? It's like, wow, I dig this band. I have no idea what they sound like, but the album art is cool.
Mm-hmm. Or you and I both have probably extensive album collections of people just because there was a studio drummer's name on the record. And that was what motivated us to buy it and check it out. And some of it might not be to our tastes, but that's how we really learn how these people are. So I just want to say, looking back at the things that you've accomplished and continue to do, I find great inspiration, not only in the things that you've accomplished, but also in your perspectives and your positivity. And I find your energy just really infectious and encouraging. And I think when I mentioned to people in my own podcast community that I was connecting with you, everyone just, spoke of you at the highest level. And it has been such an inspiration for me to get a chance to chat with you. And I want to welcome you now into my own community, because I think it's important that we extend the community. We're here to support and inspire each other and build each other up. And it has just been an absolute pleasure for me to get this opportunity.
Well, man, thank you for having me. And again, just being able to share what I was able to share with you, hopefully that will inspire and give some insight. And, I've been saying this a lot lately to all my musician friends. When's the last time you had fun making music? And it's time to start having more fun. I think, like to your point with the whole social media, it's like we're trying to strive for this perfection. We're trying to strive for this, okay, I look like Brad Pitt, right? It's like, let me get the right angle. I'll never look like Brad Pitt, but I'm going to have fun trying, right? And I think that with music, we have to have more fun. And I'm finding more and more musicians and students that I teach, they're not having as much fun as they should be. Because I think about why I got into it. It was like, okay, all right, there's two things that are important to me: playing drums and skateboarding. Those were the two things in my life for many, 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 up until Musicians Institute. I was still skateboarding because it's just fun, and you have to incorporate fun in what you're doing. And if you're not doing that, you're missing out on half of the glory, I feel, And
I've said this before, but when we are starting your professional career, everyone always says it's about filling the calendar. And as I've gotten older, what I've started to realize is it's not about filling the calendar. It's about having a calendar of things that you are excited to do, and put the emphasis not on making a living, but making a joyful life and taking that energy and sharing it with people and be encouraging. Because sometimes, as you said, people forget that this was fun because they get so stressed in terms of making a living that they start to realize the thing that was their passion now becomes something that they're resentful. So sometimes you need to take a step back and go, why did I want to do this in the first place? All because it was joyful.
Right. It was joyful. And I, you think back in those times when you first started playing, I was like, oh my God, that was so much fun. Just hammering it out with your friends in the garage or in the living room or whatever, and we become professionals, right?
Yes.
We do the professional thing. And then now it's a job. Now we have to pay the bills. And back then it was just kind of like getting together and having fun and making music. And I think so many of us have lost that feeling.
Well, it's obvious to me that that's something that you have in an abundance, that you love what you do. And I think that is a model that we should all strive to find. And I hope we get an opportunity to not only connect again, but at some point maybe connect in person.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Drummer's Pathway podcast. Please share and subscribe, get the word out, and let's keep the discussion going. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.